Thank you everybody for joining me and Inago. I'm Fiona Murphy, and I'm going to be talking about open science on its accountability, integrity, various aspects of how it relates to scholarly research. So hopefully by the end you'll be able to understand and use open science, open scholarship to benefit you, your career and your subject area. So open science is, as I'm sure you're aware, quite a new but also complex area of research interest and research methods. So I think what we're going to do is start off taking a bit of time on its context and the rationale for open science, and then we'll go through some of these, basically all of these headings, and look at some of the practices and some of the publications, outcomes and various issues that arise as a result. So there you go. So the principle of open science is for free, unencumbered access to research outputs, and in fact all parts of the research ecosystem, potentially. It relates not only to the various stages that are already customarily practiced in research, but also to ways of collaborating, of sharing information, thinking about opening up methods of code, and being careful about how you credit people who's contributed to the work. And it's not just an end in itself, it's also very much about promoting and improving reproducibility, transparency and trust in the scholarly system. So it's movement to make all scientific, by which I mean all scholarly subjects, including science, social sciences and humanities, accessible. And that's not just to other academics or people active in the research or policy worlds, but also to everyone in society. So you can see how the various aspects all connect up with each other, and also potentially have a wider effect on the way that we conduct society. Opportunities to be more open, or perhaps to be more open than your institution or your discipline currently are basically opening up across a number of domains. And that's not just an opportunity to be more open amongst your domain fellows, your peers if you like, but it's also, there's a potential to be more open globally and to have a more diverse set of participants and participation methods, and also to ask new questions of research and of ourselves. So this is quite a nice taxonomy of open science that's been put together by the Foster project. I recommend having a look at their website, as it has a lot of training materials and information. As you can see, flowing out from open science are, you can see the various headings that we're going to be looking at around open access and open data. But you can also see, if you like, that there's a range of smaller headings and activities, and some of them are very much top down. They're to do with policy and mandates and things, if you like, that are coming to guide the way that people behave and tell them what to do, what to share in order to be able to participate in the research community. But a number of others of the open science activities, if you like, are coming more from the bottom up. They're emerging communities of practice. There are people thinking about, if I've got a lab book, can I have an open lab book? What does open peer review look like? How do we practice it in our area? So, if you like, as well as learning how to comply and be able to manage various mandates, it's also about learning and developing as a community and as an individual. So this is, again, it's quite a good overview for open science and some of the questions and issues that will come up for researchers. As you see, even from the very beginning of the process at the hypothesis, you may well be finding, or will find in the future, that your funding bodies are themselves starting to think about what an open scientific proposal might look like, or start to look for things like data management plans right at the beginning of the process. Hopefully that will also then include funding apparatus or materials for you to actually be able to look after the data and manage it properly and preserve it for the longer term. Also, at the other end, where publication would have historically been research articles in a journal, probably behind a subscription paywall, that's again changing, thinking not just about where you might publish and how that might change, would it be in an open access journal, but also what you publish. It could be your data, your code, and your methods. So basically, throughout the cycle, there are various questions or thoughts or things that might come up, which have an open implication. So in which case, the impacts of open science, if you like, are there are a lot of positive impacts around additional transparency, reproducibility, and hopefully dissemination opportunities. It might well be easier both to get your information out earlier and also find other people's work earlier than you would have done before. It opens up the research environment to people not previously in that discipline or previously not researchers at all. Funders are later able to track what it is that they have funded and potentially stop themselves from funding the same project over and over again, because the results will be better known and understood and can be reused. So if you like, open science could be seen as digitally enabled science or 21st century science as usual. Hopefully it's more trustworthy and cost effective and just faster than it has been to date. Having said that, the implications aren't all entirely positive. It has been noted, for instance, for some people who have been required to produce open science, it can be slower because at every step you have to think through what are the implications. I mean, what are the rights of people whose data I'm using? Do I need to push out a new version now? And if so, how do I label it or store it? It's been highlighted that sometimes people who review proposals for funders don't always appreciate, if you like, the open science implications or what good open science might look like, and so might not necessarily score it as well as it should be scored. Funders also may not necessarily have bargained for or planned for the sorts of additional costs that might be included. That might be around APCs for open access publishing, it might be for data storage. Some communities have historically not wanted to share, and that could be a big cultural barrier, and I think that's something which maybe will take time, or maybe will take a different additional work or understanding to address. And there can be instances where sharing itself or openness is counterproductive, for instance with medical personal data for species which are vulnerable, biodiversity, or potentially for political or other security reasons. People don't necessarily have the right training yet. They might not have the right tools. So basically what we're looking at is something which we can see has great positive impact potentially for research, but we're still in a point of transition. So basically the best thing that people working in research can do is learn as much as possible, attend webinars, ask questions, and generally get to understand how they can best incorporate aspects of open science to improve their own impact and careers. So thinking about that, let's have a look at open access publishing. So here's a good view of the traditional publishing model, so for a sense of where it is that we're coming from, and to an extent what's still out there for a great number of people. Traditionally, publishing has been based on publicly funded material being written up and then submitted to paper, to journals, which are then privately peer reviewed. Copyright is transferred to the journal, and then the dissemination takes place from the journal through online or print publication processes, and it has to be paid for. Because like the business model is that you pay to read, it's free to publish, and the access then is largely institutional. However, beginning in the late 1990s, as journals and other content basically started being put online, there have been some, I suppose, increasing unrest or questioning of how that model was working. I mean, partly this is also because at the same time, library budgets were themselves plummeting. So if you like, libraries were trying to think about how to manage the access needs of their researchers. And so the basic questions went around, if you like, if journals or scientific content is now going to be pretty much all online, the distribution question or problem or cost has actually been greatly reduced. So exactly who is paying for what, if you like? So what are they paying for? Are we paying for access, or are we paying for, if you like, a service, or for the copyright itself? So I think that's where the question started being asked, and the idea of open access, if you like, so where it's actually free for everybody to access the material because it's been put up online. That work's been done. At the time as well, and certainly at the beginning, the idea or the question of who actually pays hasn't necessarily been addressed. That came a bit later. So this is quite a good definition from the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, that's SPARC, which is originated from the North America librarian community and now has a more global presence. And they campaign and seek as wide access to research outputs as possible. This is quite a good definition in a sort of top level way, if you like. That's what the ultimate objective for open access is. But it doesn't actually address, if you like, some of the complications if you actually come to try and practice open access or are looking for open access versions of articles or other materials. For instance, it doesn't address where the version of record is. It doesn't actually specify any sort of copyright or other licensing. And it also doesn't look at, well, how does this affect, if you like, full participation potential? If you like, when there was it used to be free to publish, you pay to read. Does it now become pay to publish, free to read? In which case, there are still swathes of people who are unable to fully participate. This is, as I say, though, a really good starting point. And so this is the, if you like, a sort of standard open access publishing model, which gives a bit more granularity to what might happen, what the experience might be. So as you can see, a lot of it is the same. Publicly funded research is written up and manuscripts are submitted to journals. But in this instance, it's open access journals or journals which accept open access materials. So that might, so there's latter might include hybrid journals, which, if you like, have a foot in both camps and accept both material which stays behind a paywall, which is paid for by subscription, and also has some open access content which is free to use for anybody, free to see, and which somebody's paid a fee to enable. So there may be, so basically that's how it actually goes through. You have, if you like, a sort of similar outcome insofar as there's articles which are available for people to read, to use, but the actual dispersion or dissemination model is, if you like, completely different, because rather than the energy being put into making sure that some people can see, other people can't, you know, making sure that the restrictions are being upheld, actually it's the access is just there. Hopefully it's just possible for anybody to go in. So having said that, I think as we possibly implied, there are several routes towards open access. The one that we've just talked about, which is usually known as gold, where there is a fee paid, and where immediate open access it happens, and the author or the institution retains the copyright. But there's also, if you like, the green open access route, which a lot of people do use because either they have no money, they cannot actually pay for an open access article, or it might well be, particularly if they work in social sciences or humanities, that there isn't a suitable title that would actually accept an open access article, and so they need to do something either to satisfy a funder or because they themselves have an interest in having material which is open access, in which case they will be doing a self-archiving. They'll look for a repository and put in one of the versions, whichever version their journal publishing policy will allow. Perhaps it will be the accepted version, perhaps it will be the first submitted version, and then that will be made open access. And that might be immediate, or there might be an embargo period. So again, that's something which you might well have to take advice on, perhaps from a funder, or from a journal, or from your institution, as to how to manage that. And there is also a third route to open access, which is shown below, which is where, as before mentioned, you might work with a hybrid journal, where the article, the APC charge is paid, but then there's immediate open access for your article, but not necessarily for other people's. So to sum up then, so open access fees are largely what you pay, if you like, in order to have immediate access openly available universally to your work, and also in order to keep the copyright. There is still some I suppose toing and froing around what is paid and who it's paid to. Some journals, which are run, particularly small ones by community groups, might not actually have any charge. It might be they have a friendly institution which just lets them do it as a volunteer effort. And there's a really wide range as well of APCs which are paid. We've got on here, we've got the average, so the global average, if you pay an APC, is likely to have been around $937 in 2018. However, having done a bit of research, I'm sure you've all done that as well, it can go up to $5,000 for something that's prestigious, such as a Nature article, which clearly prices a lot of people out of that market. The APC itself could be paid as a one-to-one sort of author to director journal charge, or it could be picked up by the funder or by the institution. So, a little quiz. Oh, sorry. So what do APCs cover? All these things. And basically, the way that the business model now works is, whereas the subscription charge was, if you like, covered the cost of publication and the cost of running the business, either with a society publisher or a commercial publisher, the APCs are starting to replace that. And so they're covering, if you like, not just the incremental cost of publishing your specific article, but they're also looking at, you know, what's required to run the people, to run the platforms, to invest in infrastructures, perhaps in security and legal. And so there's, if you like, there's both an incremental and there's like a general cost, which these APCs do need to cover. I think it's not always transparent, though, as to what they actually do cover, which is where sometimes people can become you know, concerned that the charges are too high or too low. So I think this is a good slide in that it shows, if you like, some of the ways that you can break up what the costs are, what goes where. I think it does need to be read carefully, however. It's from a Nature article, you can see from the bottom of the slide there. So while it is definitely cheaper if you cut the print version of a journal out and think online only, because then you don't have a printed distribution, you don't have, if you like, so much customer services issues because someone's print copies got lost or whatever. But you do still actually have to typeset, and in fact, online versions can end up being quite costly to typeset because they tend to be marked up, highlighted, linked out to other things such as data sets or generally more interactive, if you like, have interactive reference lists as well. So many journals also are still, as we've said already, hybrid. So a journal might actually be incurring the cost of running both sorts of systems. So still running a subscription list, as well as having an open access arm. So the sales administration as well, in some ways you could say for a small publisher, open access does simplify things because you basically only dealing with your authors as opposed to all your customers. But for some of the large scale publishers, if you think if they still, for instance, have a number of subscription journals, or hybrids. They also then have open access journals and perhaps independent authors that they work with then. For instance, at a particular university, it could actually be three sorts of customer now. It could be both an institutional subscriber, it could be an institutional member that has an arrangement for one or more journals if any of its researchers are authors, and it could actually be that individual members of that institution independently send in open access articles and also then have to generate paperwork and a payment model. So certainly, however, the open access model does generate more downloads per article. And I think that, if you like, is an unadulterated good. I think everybody from the author to the funder to the publisher wants there to be greater dissemination, greater interest in the published work. So I think this is also quite an interesting slide. I won't spend too long on it, but it shows, if you like, the rate of change between 2012 and 2016 in the balance between subscription and open access. So as you can see on the right with the orange, the open access part of the market, that's fully open access journals, is still small, but it's grown by a quarter, which is quite big. So if you like, so at 4 or 5% a year. And I think the other really interesting thing is the fact that the hybrid journals have really increased. So if you like, that's the subscription-only journals that don't actually accept any open access decreased, and the number of journals that had a foot in both camps was the one that increased. And I think that's where, if you like, a huge number of people have been acclimated. We're starting to come across and increasingly understand open access, which is a good thing. So to sum up, by having research freely accessible to the public, researchers do benefit from greater impact, from higher visibility, ultimately higher citation rates, and also better chances for increasing networking and obtaining funds. Also, if they're able to provide the fee, or if otherwise enabled by the system, they can keep hold of the copyright of their work and use instead Creative Commons licenses, which will come into further down the line. So again, having said that, there are sharks in the water and there are predatory journals on the publishing scene. So unfortunately, the change in business model has also led to a business opportunity for fake or predatory journals. And I can't emphasize strongly enough that you do need to be very, very careful to investigate any journal that you're planning to have any interaction with, and that's it as an author or potentially as an editorial board member, or in any other way, shape, or as a reviewer, for instance. So if you do interact with these sorts of journals, it can look like an easy win. You can get your name up, you can get your work out quickly, but ultimately it's just going to have wasted effort, resources, and not have done anything for your personal or institutional reputation. So it's quite a useful checklist here, which I'll give you a chance to have a quick look at. So basically, some really good rules of thumb are there are some sound organisations which you can look for any journal that you're thinking about working with. Does it have interactions with COPE, which is the Committee on Publication Ethics? Does it have a listing on the Directory of Open Access Journals? That's the DOAJ. Is it indexed by indexes like Scopus or ISI that you're aware of? Have people in your field heard of it or had previous interactions with it? Can you see what the policies are, particularly around things like the peer review? Are there any charges up front and very clear for you to see? So another website might be good to have a look at is called Think, Check, Submit. And that gives a lot of checklists of questions to ask, or warnings or training videos around this. And it's also run by COPE and the DOAJ, and also by OASPA, which is the organisation, it's the Open Association of Scholarly Publishers. which I think again is something which you'd want to see any publisher or journal be a member of, because they do have quite a good method of vetting. You know, they will vet the member before they can become a member. So let's have a look at open data. So ultimately, open data, I think in this context, we're thinking of as research data, which is generated through the scholarly process. It may be data underlie an article that's about to be published, has already been published, or it may be research data which is not related in any direct way to a research article. So here are some sort of handy like definitions. So you think about data, it could be files, it could be videos, could be other, if you like, kind of quite rough records. It could be something that's analog, that's in a notebook that needs to be digitized. It could be an instrument reading. So basically, it's any sort of data that's worked on by researchers. And as you can see, as you get down further on this slide, open data is what can be freely used or reused or redistributed. And that, if you like, is data that's also hopefully got some kind of quality control, that you've got in a sense of where did it come from, who, you know, what has it been used for, how might I use it. So basically, the more information that you have, the better. That also means the more valuable it is, and the more somebody else has worked on it as well. So there may well be licenses or copyrights or charges for reuse, which would make something less open. So we've got here the Tim Berners-Lee open data model. We're starting off with, if you like, anything that you can do to make your data open, so long as it's not sensitive or otherwise contravening best practice, if you like, is going to be better than not making your data open and not sharing it. So pushing your data on the web in any format under an open license is better than keeping it in a drawer or leaving it on a laptop. So if you can make it available in a structured format, something that becomes potentially more reusable and might have field names, for instance, for around the metadata, that's better. And if you can do it using a non-proprietary format, so something that's open source or otherwise more interoperable, then that's better still. If you have a good way of naming the data website, if you have, for instance, persistent identifiers such as a DOI, again, that supports the persistence, the trust, and the ability of people to kind of go back and have a look at things later on. And then, really importantly, provide that context, link data to other data or to articles, provide the metadata and the context. Well, all of these are always ways of improving access and reusability and your own impact, hopefully, for having worked on that data. So here are some sharing options. I'm going to go sort of round clockwise here. So starting off with the archives or repositories, quite often, this is a current practice. Organisations whose purpose is to preserve material for future use. There might be a national or international archive. It might be something that's subject oriented, or it might be institutional and maintained by your particular library or research centre. Project websites, often set up in response to a particular project or group, are very useful, handy in getting things up and out quickly, usually in community understood formats and with purposes, but they can be less sustainable. I mean, think if everybody over time leaves a particular project or institution, who looks after it? How does it maintain sort of format updates? All these things can start to kind of break down over time. Peer-to-peer sharing, so if you like somebody writing to somebody else and sending a file or passing a USB or flash drive, these things, if you like, are potentially very, very useful for individuals and for particular projects, but it's not useful for the funder. The funder doesn't know, for instance, when their data has been shared. it doesn't, again, help with the long-term availability either. So, so basically, I think all of these have some upsides, if you like, and they're all better than not doing anything, but they have their downsides. And I think if you've got an opportunity to use a data journal, then that would be better than any of the ones we just discussed. So data journals, if you haven't come across them before, there's a few titles shown at the bottom of this slide. They publish specifically on data articles, if you like, data descriptors, rather than a formal research article which sort of analyses and speculates and concludes and is the customary method of publishing data. They, if you like, will give a lot more information about circumstances, about error ratings, problems, instrumentation, calibration. And quite often very much focused on, if you like, giving people information that would enable data to be reused. They will absolutely want data to be cited. So there's a lot of best practice around using persistent identifiers, such as DOIs. And very critically, the data themselves will be reviewed in some way in order that the publication can happen. So somebody will have done some sort of quality control on the data before the data article can be published, and hopefully that provides, if you like, an impetus for data to become more of a recognised first-class research output, and enables data to be reused with more trust, promoted in that way. And that should hopefully enable data to enter the knowledge canon, the body of knowledge that we have about a particular subject. So, the significance of open data then. For data to enter the body of scientific knowledge, it needs to be, in fact, treated more systematically than left on laptops or potentially just put up on the project website and then forgotten. So these are some of the upsides. These are some of the things that we'd hope to see from good data management, good data practice, as well as, if you like, credit and recognition for the researchers and people that actually do the data collection and the curation. It should also give funders a better idea of what it is they're funded and enable them to not have to fund the same thing over and over because they don't know that what data has already been produced. It should hopefully improve reproducibility and trust, and it also enable people who are perhaps not necessarily inside that domain circle to be able to use the data better and understand it. There are challenges around practices and incentives. At the moment, lots of people aren't incentivized to use or to practice open data because closed data is seen to be more competitive. And sometimes there are skill sets or funding models which also don't help. Right, so let's go on to open repositories and preprints. So, as you can see, we talked about open science and open access. And if you like, that's just changing a bit the result, but not actually really changing the method of the kinds of research that you do. Open data is more about pushing something out that has hitherto been often forgotten about or hidden. But a big part of the drive of making research more accessible is to think about self-archiving, either as we said before, as part of a kind of green open access process, but it also might be around actually sharing a preprint or something that's actually not yet been submitted to a journal, and also pushing your data up separately into a repository such as Figshare or Dryad or Zenodo. So we self-archive in a repository. So that was often like a pre or a post publication print. So that is, you might use put the submitted version of your article into a repository. It might be the accepted version, or in certain cases, you might be allowed to put the final published version in. In all cases, I highly recommend checking with the journal that you're working with to make sure that you're not going against any of their policies. Similarly, there are some repository tools that you can use, such as fair sharing. There is methods and versions which different funders, different publishers allow you to work with. Like I say, you may well need to take advice, and there may well be some policy or mandate inconsistencies that you'll need some help untangling. So do think about looking at organisations like fairsharing.org, or working with your institution or publisher to make sure that whatever you do, you stay legal, if you like. You stay where you're supposed to be. A recent survey of repository content was conducted by the Directory of Open Access Repositories. That's in 2018. And as you can see, nearly all the material that these repositories were holding was around either journal articles or grey literature, if you like, sort of theses and chapters and books, meeting reports, that kind of thing. Only near the bottom do you see data sets, patents and software. So you see they're very much still catching up. People are so far not so much concentrating on those. So looking a bit more closely at some different kinds of repositories. A lot of institutions, individual universities or groups of universities, for instance, have recently set up their own repositories and encouraging their researchers, their academics, to deposit with them. There are some big advantages to that, actually. For instance, hopefully you will have somebody on site who can advise and help with what you want to do. And it should also help the understanding of the institution itself, if you like, what it is that their researchers are doing. They hitherto wouldn't have had much of an idea, if you like, whereas this is going to give them a better sense of what the activities are that they're supporting or housing. So subject repositories, I think, are also interesting, particularly as they tend to be discipline-led. So the ones that are mentioned there, so PubMat, MED, and RepEc and Archive, are all actually quite long established. I think some of them are over 20 years old. So they're very much established within the communities, and they're very much trusted as a result. So through having this facility, which has been well used and is understood and recognised by the community, that's enabled that community to itself work more openly. And then data repositories, if you like, which are the ones which we see have hitherto not been much used, but I think are going to be coming up and becoming much more used in the future. I think what you want, if you have a data set, ideally is to have a specialist data repository to work with, because they should be able to advise on structures and formats and preservation. And they're also, if you like, then be able to attract other users who might be interested in seeing your data set and help you with things like linking data sets with published articles as well. These are, having said that, also emerging as something that the institutions, that the universities are starting to accommodate, particularly where there is a data set that's not particularly associated with a specific funded project that doesn't otherwise have a home, or whether it's like a long tail or a small data set. So some steps towards self-archiving. Basically, I would say you should always just start thinking about this as early as possible in the process. At the start of the project, ideally, and start thinking about who your stakeholders are, the funder, what is the funder looking for, and also where a data set might go, and even perhaps where you might want to publish any research outputs, and think about what their policies and requirements are. I think any repository finder tools that you can use, enabling fair data is a really good place to start. It was a project largely in Earth and Environmental Sciences, but there is some good general information there as well. So working with the policies, as I say, it can be really challenging. And so I think ideally allow some time for doing this, and also think about if you like, the order of the steps that you want to take. If you can upload data before publishing an article, it's going to make it easier to put a link to that data in your article. So basically get advice early and often, I would always say. And then when it comes to the the publication part, a data availability statement, which actually details some further information about where the data are, what formats they're in, and perhaps some access requirements, is going to be really, really helpful to anybody who looks at your research outputs in the future. So, and also if you think about these things, as I say, early and often, putting together something like a data availability statement should be comparatively straightforward to produce. So the preprints are a really very recent newcomer to the field. This is quite a good summary of what you might be thinking of when you're thinking of preprint. So basically, it's a version of a manuscript which hasn't yet been peer reviewed. So often it won't yet have been submitted to a journal. Sometimes people will actually submit a preprint and also submit a journal manuscript at the same time, in which case the versions might diverge. There will be a certain amount of screening done by the organisation or the platform before things will be put up. Otherwise, they'll go up pretty straight away, given a comparatively open license, and downloaded and shared and commented on. And ideally, people are seeking feedback from their own community. Now, this is very much an emerging practice. A number of disciplines have set up discipline-specific preprint platforms in the last couple of years. So basically, I think a lot of communities are still learning about what it is that they want to do, what the processes or the dangers, if you like, might be for engaging in this. But I think a lot of it has been very positive. So as you can see, there are certainly, I think, some very straightforward benefits in terms of accelerating, certainly access to the public record, enables you to put your flag in the sand, if you like, and state that you've done this piece of work without having to wait for a peer review and potentially a publishing queue. Having said that, some of the I think the business models haven't necessarily been worked out. Some of these preprint platforms are being based on a community voluntary effort, and they're very, if you like, sort of casual. So the long-term sustainability may not have been fully worked through. And there are some working practices issues. I mean, for instance, if you get a lot of feedback for your preprint, how many times would you, or how often would you update it? And how does that affect then potentially a journal submission? But there are some emerging best practices coming along all the time. There's quite a lot of research being done by sort of national funders and also by some of the big private foundations to try and promote and understand what preprints are about, and to make sure that they work for science, if you like. So, on to open peer review. So this is, again, it's quite a good mapping on some of the aspects of open peer review, which if you like, has fallen out because of thinking about open access. If you make the article open to view, why not make the peer review open to review as well? Hopefully it will show whether or not the review process itself was rigorous. It also potentially speeds up access to articles, because you could put the initial submitted version up and then let the open peer review sort of come through and refine the thoughts around it. Again, it's still an evolving field. Some communities are much more comfortable in terms of their domain than others with doing it. Sometimes it's to do with the size of the community, or it could be to do with the rate at which publications come out. I mean, some work much faster than others. So these sort of considerations are contributing to how the open peer review process is developing. So there are a few, I'll put them up. There are a few workflow practices as well that are emerging. For instance, the Winnower and Copernicus version, where people can leave comments on just a submitted version, which is ultimately downloaded and then a corrected version uploaded, and that becomes the official version of record. There are other versions where, if you like, there are invited reviewers, perhaps as well as anyone in the community can contribute, and these reports will be formally requested and submitted, published, and then perhaps updated over time. There's a decoupled version where the peer review may take place from a separate third-party organisation, and then can be submitted along with the article to a number of journals. And there's actually, if you like, a more informal version of that. Increasingly, journals are welcoming the peer review reports of articles that have been coming through where the article has been rejected from somewhere else. So these can be taken into account, if you like. That work can be then used when something's being resubmitted. So the implications of open peer review process. I mean, again, there are lots of, I think, really positive implications around it. Potentially, peer review itself, always hidden, often difficult to get people to do, can be an accredited activity that can be shown on your academic record. Hopefully, it enables something to happen more speedily. So if someone has a window of opportunity to comment quickly on something, rather than waiting for an invited reviewer to come back in a month, that's going to help with the review process. It also makes things more transparent, if you like. It would obviate, it would get rid of a lot of the predatory journals, potentially, by showing that there wasn't any review process. So you can actually, if you like, match the peer review and use that as part of the reproducibility process as well. Having said that, there are, again, some issues. There are problems if you're a very junior researcher, you're asked to evaluate somebody who's very senior in your field. That can cause some ethical issues, some problems around sort of power imbalance. It's also been flagged up that where particularly perhaps people who aren't experts in the field, perhaps members of the public, can get access to something medical that hasn't been properly peer reviewed, that can lead to danger, if you like. And we need to be able to be very clear about what version of record is. So basically, I think, having said that, what I really like about the open peer review process is its potential to be ongoing. If you like, it's not something that stops at the publication of an article. It's something that can continue on into the future, and so lead to additional insights and more transparency and more rigor. So, quick quiz. There's no sort of buttons or anything to press here, but it's just to make sure you've been listening. Which of the following is not a type of open peer review? It's public commentary. Oh, here we are. You have got a poll. Right. Should we leave that? Oh, thank you. Right. So, and hopefully you can see. Sorry, it's kind of slightly thrown me this. But it was the last one, basically. So double-blind peer review is certainly not open. So let's go on to look at open source and open educational resources. Open source is basically a software movement. It's where people are able to access not just, if you like, the functionality of software, they can also access the code. Often it'll be put up somewhere like GitHub, and they'll have very, very open licenses, and people will be allowed to redistribute or to update or make changes themselves, and also pass around and incorporate into their own offering. This came as a result, if you like, because as the thinking around open science has matured, it's extended to an interest in the infrastructures of open science. And I think there's also an interest because rather than being profit-driven and proprietary, it's more likely to be community-driven, written by people who understand the needs of the community. By the way, I've got the result of the poll, and you did really well. Yeah, 79% got it right. Well done. And it's also likely to be less of a lockout, if you like. So you're less likely to have bought a license for something, and then either the license runs out or you change for another product, and then there's information on your own data that you wouldn't be able to access, or it might not be compatible with other things that you want to use. So open source gets rid of those sorts of problems. So, and then there's the open educational resources, which, if you like, are teaching, learning materials or other things to help support research activities, which are basically up online and have really open access, really open licenses, no or low cost, and can be redistributed with very few restrictions. I might have sort of massive online open courses, for instance. So then obviously those are very key tool potentially, particularly when you're taking a global approach to open science. So as you can imagine, there are a number of advantages, and these can be for anyone that uses them. It can be individual researchers, it can be students, it can also be the institutions, if you like. So if you're running a course and the educational resources you want to use are open, clearly that's going to help with your ability to get out to lots of people, and to be able to manage to run a lot of courses. Having said that, as I'm sure you realise, because we're not all doing it, there are some disadvantages. They can be around quality and reliability. Again, if something is done by volunteer effort, it may not always be updated as often as you'd like. And there could even be malicious changes if something's very open, which you don't necessarily become aware of immediately. The incentives for producing and maintaining these are not necessarily long-term sustainable. So again, you have to watch that something that was available last year is still available this year. And I think it's also very important to remember, just because something is open doesn't mean that everyone's got equal access. I think something that we do need to remember is there can be issues with bandwidth, sometimes with particular websites being closed off from particular groups, geographically perhaps. So there are these implications which we do also need to take into account when thinking about open educational resources. So, and with that in mind, open licensing. So by understanding and applying open licenses, that can make a really big difference in your ability to work openly, and also to build trust in what you're using that either you've produced or other people have produced. So it's a really good idea to get an idea about this. As I'm sure you're aware, copyright is a legal and exclusive right which pertains to either the creator of an idea or work, or the person who paid that creator, I should say, and they hold it, and it gives them, if you like, rights to either exploit themselves, or they can transfer rights, or in certain instances to others. Traditionally, copyrights have been conferred to publishers by researchers or research groups in order to enable dissemination. Part of the certainly gold open access model is for the researcher or the institution or the funder to retain the copyright and instead provide a Creative Commons license, which, if you like, has the opposite effect, where there's free reuse unless there's some sort of condition. And it might be as simple as just credit the author. It might be, as we'll see a bit further along, there might be some more rights that could also be worked with. But it also, it makes things a lot easier when you're starting to think about a reuse scientific method as well, where if you have to keep going back and looking, getting permissions and copyrights, that's going to slow you down and cause a lot of restrictions. Whereas Creative Commons licenses are you're more likely to be able to reuse confidently and legally and expressively. So some variations in open licensing. This is quite a nice, just sort of three strikes and you're out sort of view here. Very handy figure. Copyrights, if you like, are closed with explicit permissions which you confer to others. And it may be that you provide them with all the rights, but that would have to be for a fee or some other consideration. Creative Commons, as I say, starts open with some conditions, and there are a range of Creative Commons licenses. We'll look at those in a moment. And then there's the public domain, which is basically open to anyone, and that could be things that are out of date, it could be things that have been released by the government, or things that you've put up yourself that you just don't want to bother with licensing. So again, I think it's useful in that instance to say in the public domain rather than just leave something blank, and then you've got clarity over what the reuse situation is. So Creative Commons licensing, some useful bullet points. You know, it's non-revocable, not exclusive, allows distribution, applies worldwide. There's a Creative Commons agency based in the US which works a lot on translating Creative Commons licenses, for instance, and clarifying and updating them, making sure they're fit for purpose. So that it should be possible to find a license which works for the situation that you're in when you're producing something. And here's a list of some of the most commonly used Creative Commons licenses. If you like, the CC BY is the one that tends to be standard in use for funded work. So the national, international funders use CC BY. So any sort of derivative work, any sort of reuse, so long as there's credit given to the originator. The non-commercial version is largely the same, but it's more protective against industrial exploitation, if you like. So it's not to say that industrial exploitation couldn't take place, but there would need to be permission asked. There would have to be some kind of interaction. It couldn't just take place without that interaction. So similarly, the no derivatives thing is basically you can use, you can distribute and display, but you can't produce derivative works unless, again, you've gone back and worked with the creator. And then also, interestingly, with the essay version, it's a bit umbrellaed, if you like, so that you can distribute the derivative works only under a license identical to the license that governs the original work. So kind of a cascading effect. Someone's like marked what anyone's allowed to do with anything that derives from this original work. So as you can see, Creative Commons is an umbrella, but not all creative licenses are exactly the same. So, and we've come to the end of the session. So thank you ever so much